On October 29, 2018, a brand new Boeing aircraft took off from Jakarta, Indonesia. 12 minutes later, it was gone. 189 people dead. Then, 4 months later, March 10, 2019, it happened again. A different plane, a different country, the same aircraft model. 157 more people dead in 6 minutes. 346 people total, gone. And Boeing knew. They knew before the first plane fell. They knew before the second plane fell, and they said nothing. What followed wasn't justice. It was the most sophisticated corporate cover-up in aviation history, one that reached all the way to the White House, the FAA, and the halls of Congress. People tried to stop it. Engineers, quality managers, pilots. One by one, they raised the alarm. One by one, they were ignored, silenced, or fired. And here's the question that should keep you up at night. How does a company get charged with the deadliest corporate crime in American history and walk away without a single criminal conviction? That's exactly what happened, and this is how. To understand the disaster, you first need to understand the pressure Boeing was under in 2011. Airbus had just launched the A320neo, a fuel-efficient, next-generation aircraft that airlines were lining up to buy. American Airlines alone placed an order for 260 of them. Boeing had a choice: build an entirely new aircraft, which would take a decade and cost tens of billions, or upgrade the existing 737, a plane that had been flying since 1968. They chose the upgrade. They called it the 737 MAX. But there was a problem. The new, more fuel-efficient LEAP engines were bigger, and bigger engines don't fit under a 737's wings the way they used to. So Boeing mounted them higher and further forward, and that changed how the plane flew. At high speeds and steep angles, the nose of the MAX would pitch up unpredictably, a handling characteristic so different from older 737 models that pilots would need an entirely new type rating to fly it. New training meant new costs for airlines, and that threatened sales. So Boeing's engineers invented a software fix, a secret software fix. They called it MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. When it detected the nose pitching too high, it would automatically push it back down. Problem solved, or so they thought. MCAS relied on a single sensor, one angle of attack sensor, to decide whether to activate. One reading, on a commercial aircraft carrying hundreds of people. If that sensor failed, MCAS wouldn't know. It would activate anyway, and it would push the nose down, again, and again, and again. Boeing knew this. Their own internal test data showed that if MCAS activated uncontrollably, the outcome would be catastrophic. They classified it as merely major, not dangerous. Then they decided not to tell anyone the system even existed. Pilots were handed a manual with no mention of MCAS. Airlines were given no MCAS simulator training. The FAA never received the full picture of what the system could do. Boeing's chief technical pilot at the time later wrote in an internal instant message, "I basically lied to the regulators." October 29, 2018, 6:20 in the morning. Lion Air Flight 610 departs Jakarta. Brand new Boeing 737 MAX 8. The aircraft is just months old. The passengers are settling in for a 40-minute domestic flight. What they don't know is that the previous flight on this exact aircraft had already experienced a malfunction. The angle of attack sensor was giving false readings. Maintenance cleared it. The plane flew again. Seconds after takeoff, the left AOA sensor sends a wrong signal. MCAS activates. The nose pitches down. The pilots pull back. MCAS activates again. They pull back again. This happens more than 20 times in 11 minutes. The pilots never knew what was fighting them. MCAS wasn't in their manual. They had never been trained on it. At 6:44 in the morning, Flight 610 hit the Java Sea at over 500 miles per hour. All 189 people on board were killed instantly. The investigation found 89 separate contributing factors, but at the center of all of them was one thing: a piece of software that Boeing had hidden, attached to a single faulty sensor on a plane carrying nearly 200 people. The crash was front-page news worldwide. Boeing's response was immediate and calculated. They released a statement blaming pilot error. They quietly issued a bulletin to pilots describing MCAS for the first time, but minimized it. They insisted the MAX was safe. Internally, the story was different. Messages between Boeing employees from this period, later released to Congress, paint a damning picture. One pilot wrote about the MAX simulator. "This airplane is designed by clowns, who in turn are supervised by monkeys." Another employee wrote, "I still haven't been forgiven by God for the covering up I did last year." These weren't external critics. These were Boeing's own people, writing to each other in real time while the planes kept flying. But the FAA agreed with Boeing. On March 11, 2019, 2 days after the Ethiopian crash, the FAA issued a formal statement, quote, "No basis to order grounding of the aircraft." Every major regulator on Earth had already grounded the MAX. The FAA stood alone. March 10, 2019, 6:38 in the morning. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 departs Addis Ababa, bound for Nairobi. 149 passengers, 8 crew. The plane is brand new. It has flown just 1,200 hours. Within seconds of liftoff, the left AOA sensor registers an erroneous reading. The stick shaker activates. It never stops. MCAS fires. The crew follows every Boeing prescribed emergency procedure. It isn't enough. 6 minutes and 20 seconds after takeoff, at over 575 miles per hour, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 hits farmland near the town of Adrian. The impact is so violent, the aircraft is buried 12 feet into the ground. There are no survivors. 157 people from 35 countries gone. This time, the world didn't wait for Boeing or the FAA. China grounded the MAX within hours. Indonesia, Singapore, Australia, the EU, they all followed within 24 hours. 2 days later, under public pressure, President Trump announced the grounding. The FAA had no choice but to comply. 346 people were now dead, and Boeing, the company that built the plane, designed the software, hid the system, and misled the regulators, was still publicly calling it a training issue. In October 2019, Boeing turned over more than 100 pages of internal emails and instant messages to the House Transportation Committee. What was inside them would shock the world and confirm what investigators had long suspected. Mark Faulkner, Boeing's chief technical pilot, had written in a 2016 message while testing MCAS in a simulator, "I basically lied to the regulators unknowingly." In a separate email, he boasted about Jedi mind-tricking regulators into accepting reduced pilot training requirements. In the same batch of messages, 2 Boeing pilots discussing whether they would put their own families on a MAX simulator-trained aircraft. One asks the question, the other answers in one word, no. Boeing had also never disclosed to the FAA that MCAS had been quietly expanded. Initially certified for narrow, high-altitude, high-speed maneuvers, it had been redesigned to activate at lower speeds, lower altitudes, during normal flight. The FAA officials responsible for pilot training requirements never knew. The House Transportation Committee launched an 18-month investigation. Their final report, 238 pages, concluded the crashes were the product of a culture of concealment at Boeing and grossly insufficient oversight by the FAA. Their verdict, the deaths of 346 people were preventable. Ed Pearson had been a senior manager at Boeing's 737 factory in Renton, Washington. Months before Lion Air 610 crashed, he wrote to Boeing's general manager warning the factory was in dangerously unstable condition. Overworked employees, chronic parts shortages, runaway schedule pressure. He asked them to shut it down. The plane that became Lion Air 610 was rolling off that exact production line when Pearson was writing his warnings. Boeing ignored him. He wrote again between the 2 crashes. They ignored him again. He testified to Congress. The warnings are all on record. Then there was Sam Salapur, a Boeing quality engineer who had been raising alarms since 2013, not about the MAX, but about the 787 Dreamliner. On April 17, 2024, he testified under oath to the U.S. Senate. Salapur told senators that Boeing workers were using excessive force to close out-of-tolerance gaps in fuselage joints, that employees were literally jumping on sections of the plane to make parts align. He alleged that 98.7% of the time required shimming wasn't done. His supervisor told him he would have killed someone for raising these concerns. And then there was John Barnett, 32 years at Boeing, a quality manager at the 787 Dreamliner plant in North Charleston, South Carolina. He filed his first FAA complaint in 2017, metal shavings near electrical wiring, faulty emergency oxygen systems, defective parts being installed without documentation. The FAA substantiated several of his findings. Boeing's own internal investigation confirmed the oxygen system defect. Barnett appeared in the New York Times. He was featured in a Netflix documentary. He filed a federal whistleblower retaliation lawsuit against Boeing, and then he kept fighting until March 2024. The week of March 4, 2024, John Barnett is in Charleston, South Carolina, in the middle of his deposition for his federal retaliation lawsuit against Boeing, scheduled to continue his testimony the next morning. On the morning of March 9th, he is found dead in his truck in a hotel parking lot, a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The Charleston County coroner rules it a suicide. He was 62 years old. His attorneys released a statement. Mr. Barnett's last words make clear that while Boeing may not have pulled the trigger, the company is responsible for his death. His family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Boeing in March 2025, alleging the years of retaliation caused the mental health decline that led to his death. 7 weeks later, April 30th, 2024, Joshua Dean, a quality auditor at Spirit Aerosystems, Boeing's fuselage supplier, dies at age 45. He had filed a federal retaliation complaint after reporting misdrilled holes in 737 MAX fuselages. He developed a sudden MRSA infection, then pneumonia, then sepsis. He was on life support for weeks. 2 Boeing-linked whistleblowers, both represented by the same attorney. both dead within 8 weeks of each other, both in the middle of active legal proceedings against Boeing. The official findings are what they are, but the timing shook the aviation world. Here is a number that explains everything about how this happened. By 2017, Boeing was performing approximately 96% of its own aircraft certification work on behalf of the FAA. The FAA had 45 people overseeing Boeing's 1,500-person internal certification unit. 24 of those FAA staff were engineers. Boeing's own internal surveys found that 39% of the engineers acting as FAA-designated representatives felt undue pressure from Boeing management. When they raised safety concerns, they were sidelined. The FAA fined Boeing for this, but only after 346 people were already dead. The House committee described it plainly. Boeing and the FAA had developed a relationship so intertwined that the regulator had lost the ability to regulate, compliant and not safe, in the words of the committee's chair, and people died. The 737 MAX was grounded for 20 months. Boeing burned through more than $20 billion in direct costs, customer compensation, production shutdowns, program charges. Analysts at Bank of America put the total, including lost orders and indirect costs, at over $60 billion. Boeing has now posted losses in 6 consecutive years. In 2024 alone, the company lost nearly $12 billion. Its stock price, which hit an all-time high of $430 9 days before the Ethiopian Airlines crash, has never recovered. As of today, it trades nearly 50% below that peak. Meanwhile, the CEO who oversaw both crashes and was fired over them, Dennis Muhlenberg, walked away with approximately $62 million invested pension and equity. With stock options, the figure approaches $80 million. Boeing's initial fund for the families of all 346 victims, $50 million total. Now, here's where the story gets darker, because this is the part that most people never heard about. In January 2021, the Department of Justice charged Boeing with 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the United States for deceiving the FAA during certification of the 737 MAX, $2.5 billion, the largest aviation disaster settlement in U.S. history. But Boeing did not plead guilty. Instead, they signed a deferred prosecution agreement, a deal where the charge would simply disappear after 3 years if Boeing behaved itself. No guilty plea, no trial, no executive went to prison. Not one person was held criminally accountable for 346 deaths. The only individual ever charged was Mark Faulkner, the pilot who wrote the Jedi mind trick messages. He went to trial in March 2022. A Texas jury acquitted him on all counts. The DOJ's entire prosecution of a company that killed 346 people produced 0 convictions. Then, on January 5, 2024, 5 years after the second crash, a door plug blew off a brand new Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9 at 16,000 feet. No deaths, but the passengers sitting next to that hole could have died, and Boeing was back in court. The DOJ found Boeing had violated its deferred prosecution agreement, failed to build the compliance program it had promised. In July 2024, Boeing agreed to plead guilty, a guilty plea at last, after 346 deaths, 6 years of litigation, a door blowing off a plane at altitude. And then the judge said no. In December 2024, U.S. District Judge Reed O'Connor rejected Boeing's guilty plea, the same judge who had previously called this, in his own words, the deadliest corporate crime in U.S. history. On May 23, 2025, 6.5 years after the first crash, the Department of Justice announced a non-prosecution agreement with Boeing. Not a guilty plea, not a conviction, a deal that allowed Boeing to pay fines and walk away, clean. 346 people, the deadliest corporate crime in American history. 6 years of investigations, congressional hearings, whistleblower deaths, and broken legal promises. And the final answer from the United States Department of Justice is no criminal record. The families of the victims exhausted every legal remedy. On March 31, 2026, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals denied their final petition. The case was closed. Boeing walks free. This is what a culture of concealment looks like when it reaches its conclusion. Engineers warned them, managers warned them, pilots warned them. Whistleblowers lost their careers, their health, and in some cases their lives, warning them. And at the end of all of it, after 346 people died in 2 preventable crashes, after the clowns and monkeys messages, after the hidden software, after the Jedi mind tricks on regulators, after the broken agreements and the blown-off door, Boeing got a fine and a clean record. The truth has a razor's edge, and sometimes the most terrifying thing about the truth isn't what it reveals, it's who it doesn't touch.